It's all about humanity. About humanity.
Welcome back to another video. Today I'm joined with Lo and Beetyr. Thanks for coming along, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Hello.
So we'll, like the other videos, we will start off with standard builds, exotics, power-ups, and then we'll move on to expertise. So before we get into Lo's meme builds, can you tell me what you run, Beetyr, in your suit and setup?
Yeah, so my basic 35s are the usual con look agility. And then when you're running exotics, you usually always want to try to get crit hit reduction. And then I run carbine damage and sure shot damage. The other options that I think other officers run are like you can throw some heal potency in there, especially if you're running GA for those swift heal chances. And in your expertise, you can always go with the faster heal cooldown. So some people run heal potency for those reasons. And then the other thing is a lot of officers run glancing blow ranged, I guess. It really depends on what you're doing, I guess. I just try to be a little bit more offensive.
Yeah, those are good recommendations. I used to run, I've ran a lot of different combinations. I did run healing potency for a while, and I can't say it's viable, especially with the heal resets, like you were saying. I currently run the same setup you are running, Conagel luck, and then the CHR with sure shot. As far as power-ups go, I personally almost always run a full stack of CHR 29s. If it's a really imbalanced fight to where your team has the upper hand by mile, you could throw in some carbine damage power-ups or sure shot, or you can be an absolute maniac like Lo and run those no matter what.
Absolutely. What I'd recommend against, though, is running 3 damage power-ups. Like, at minimum, you want to make sure you have 2 CHR on, because the damage you're going to sustain, especially if you're doing battlefields and take part in a close-range fight, it's going to be huge. From AoEs, from commando and officer, you're just going to burn down. So that damage you're trying to pick up from that is going to be mitigated completely just by being dead. But I definitely think you can incorporate it. I also run carbine damage, sure shot damage, and CHR in my exotics. I do precision instead of agility in my 35s, which I think was pretty easily substitutable. And power-ups, I do 2 CHR and 1 carbine damage. But I think you should try to aim for having at least roughly 40% CHR, regardless of your choices. And from there, once you hit that mark, you can fill with whatever you want, an additional CHR, sure shot damage, or carbine damage.
And the reason we all run so much CHR is you're there not as really a damage bot. You really need to put your primary focus on staying alive, so that you don't lose group runs, and that can actually end your group. We'll get into that more later, but do stack some defense. You can stack some offense if you want, but that's the main priority. All right, moving right along, I think we can get into expertise. Officer expertise is pretty cookie cutter. There's only like 2 or 3 different things that you can kind of variate, but for the most part, I think we all pretty much run the same thing. So we all get probably con as our first box. Is that what you guys get?
Yeah, that's what I get. Free health, why not?
Sure. And that comes in handy when you're getting assisted on. The next box is sidearm efficiency, which you don't actually have to pick up this box if you don't want to. I like to pick it up. You can instead put those points in armors. I pick up sidearm efficiency, which unlocks your pistol attacks or your carbine attacks. So you'll want to get that full tree, but you can't get it immediately because you can only get 2 points on that second page. Now this is where you'll probably want to put some points into armor if you can afford it, or you can put points into melee. I personally like to go with the melee tree to get that crippling vortex, because that has been known to end fights a time or two. It's a 10-second long route on your enemy, and it's a AoE ability.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's 15-meter range too from wherever you are standing, and it get whenever you use it. That's pretty nasty.
I think it's probably in most situations the better options. Being the builds I run, I don't pick it up. I don't go down to melee tree whatsoever.
Some people like to put those points instead in the stem line just because of convenience, and that's perfectly fine if you want to do that. But Crippling Vortex is really a nice ability to have if used correctly.
I think it really, guys. I think it depends on really what you're trying to do with Officer. I think if you're sticking to a certain element of this game, you'll be fine having the stem line, and you don't need any of the melee line. But or you can get rid of the melee line and just put more points into armor and increase your survivability if you want to. But I do think that going down to get Capitate and Crippling Vortex, I think that can be a nice group utility, but it's also going to help you a lot in solo play as well. You know what I mean?
Sure, and Leg Strike as well if you choose to get that. So after you get these points unlocked, you can't progress any further on the last line. You have to spend 2 more points. 2 things you absolutely must get are Synaptic Stimulator and Environment Purge. What Synaptic does is it clears, I believe, 2 debuffs off of your target, or I'm sorry, off of yourself.
Yeah.
And those go in a specific order, just like the Medic Serotonin Purge. And the other ability is Environment Purge, which removes up to 3 dots on yourself. So if you have, let's say a 6 stack, and you press this ability, you only have a 3 stack afterward.
Yeah, those are must-haves.
What's interesting about it as well, not that it's super applicable in PvP, but the Environmental Purge will also block the application of new dots, be it Commando, Medic Bleed, or the like. So
with those points invested, you now have access to the last line of the first page. First thing you want to do is pick up Pistol Burn. That is one of your action spam abilities that you will need to grab, and you can pick up Crippling Vortex if you took the melee tree. Another must-have here, I would say at this point, is Emergency Shield. That can save your life if you're getting assisted on, and you can also use it between SFP rounds.
I mean, I personally, if you don't pick up Crippling Vortex and you go down to melee line, I don't find that tree worth it. That's really the prize at the end of it, just because of previous things said about it, how it can regroup, AoE damage, etc. And absolutely, Emergency Shields is one of your essential abilities. You need it in any kind of group fight or single fight.
Yeah, I would agree. You need Emergency Shields as an officer, and then Crippling Vortex. I mean, if you're going to go down that line, you definitely should get this. Otherwise, don't go down the line at all.
Okay, and we'll talk more about these abilities later and what they do, but I think we can move on to the second page now. We have 26 points left at this point. So the very first thing you want to do in the second page is pick up Leadership, because you're going to be a GA officer, and if you don't have this box, then your buffs are going to be on a timer, and your scatters and charges are going to be short. So this is absolutely a critical box to put your points into. And you have to put in 2 more points before you can get into the second tree. So I like to put at least 2 points into Explosives Expert. So that reduces your action cost for your AoE abilities, which is quite nice if you're running low on action.
Yep, I do that as well. I'd say of your damaging abilities, the AoEs are going to be the biggest action hogs, and that can put you significantly behind, and it can lead to you being unable to proc action for your group when you run out of action due to AoEs.
All right, so with those points invested, we have the second line of this expertise page unlocked to us. You'll want to get over to the far left, Advanced Tactics. This is the first of your 3 officer buffs. And these are infinite duration, so they're always nice to have on you. There's really no reason not for you to pick them up, so pick up that and then Focus Fire, and then you have 2 more points on this line to invest. Now I like to put 3 points into AoE Critical Chance, because let's face it, you can put 2 points in and have 25% critical damage, or you can put 3 points in and have 50%, so it's a no-brainer for me.
Same
Yeah,
here.
I also have that.
You're not going to find many expertise boxes that are going to give you a 25% crit chance of some kind of ability you have. And on this line, I like to deviate a bit from the norm. On the far right side, you have lethal aim, which is an increase to the sure shot line. As most officers go down in the first part of the tree, they go down the carbine and pistol tree. It'll give you an innate 8% damage if you take sidearm efficiency. You can stack that with an additional 10% from the lethal aim portion of it here. And depending on your exotics, you can boost that to quite a significant sum. And that can lead to some heavy hits from Sure Shot, which has a quick cooldown and is not much of an action hog.
Yeah, I think especially if you only are doing battlefields, that lethal aim will give you a nice boost to your assists. So it's definitely a viable choice, as Lo was saying. So you have points invested here on the second line, which should by now have unlocked the third row for you. First thing you want to do is pick up Pistol Drill Master. This is the last of your 3 officer buffs. It is also a very effective way to generate action for your group. So we'll talk about that more later, but be sure and pick this up. The other points you need to invest will be into high explosives. So this, when you have full points into this box, this will increase the damage of your AoEs by a whole 25%. So on top of having SFP, this is really nice to have, and you're really gonna notice the amount of damage you're putting out compared to volleys that you otherwise wouldn't have with these points invested. All right, so with that, with those points invested, you should have access to the 4th row here. Over to the left, your basic officer skills coming up again. You'll have Inspiration unlockable, and as well as Scatter. So you should definitely pick those abilities up. And then you will be able to pick up Superior Firepower, which if you don't know what it does, it once you have full points invested into it, it's on, I believe, a 3-minute cooldown, and it is one of the best abilities in the game. It can end fights, it can do a ton of damage, so always pick up this ability if you're playing officer. There's no excuse not to get it.
Yeah, it's a great move.
Yep, absolutely. Probably your strongest ability. Along with
AoE damage is increased by 125%, and AoE crit chance is increased by 50.
On this tree, you start to you have the ability to unlock the advanced paint target line, which is also beneficial for a ranged assist and single target damage. It starts out with some damage and action cost reduction to the paint target ability, and from there on this tree you can also advance into advanced target tracking, which will increase the crit hit damage suffered by a target. You can apply it to multiple when you SFP, and that can increase the damage from there.
I would at least recommend going to the advanced paint target Mark 4, because that's going to get you up to Mark 8, I believe. The lower tiers of paint target do not have the 64 meter range, so as an officer, you are limited on range. So you will want to have this 64 meter ability.
I consider that mandatory if you're going to play and want a PvP.
And this debuff, it'll increase the damage of your other single target attacks, which is a nice benefit, especially if you have these 2 boxes. Beetyr, I believe, can you remind me what these debuffs do exactly?
Yeah, they increase the crit chance on your target. They increase the paint target and sure shot damage, I believe. And then also, if you have the advanced target identification, it increases your targets. It decreases your target's like camo, I believe, something like that.
All right, so with that, we just have a few points left to invest. One of the last things you want to do is you want to get the primacy box of SFP. Otherwise, you're going to have a 15-minute long cooldown on your SFP as opposed to a 3-minute long cooldown with this box. So another thing to note about this is even if you get those points into primacy, sometimes your SFP can bug out and go onto that 15-minute cooldown, which is nice that we have recalibration to fix that, but in the past, that was just a really annoying issue that always came up to us.
Yeah, in certain types of lag, officers sometimes the most frustrating profession to play. You're dealing with that left and right. Major abilities just failing on you when you need them the most. And even recalibration has been nice, but I don't think sometimes it still doesn't even work.
Yeah, I've had a bug out. I don't know what causes that, but it'll happen. Biggest thing is just don't face roll. Slow down just a little bit when hitting essential abilities.
Sure, and that's another reason why you shouldn't macro things on officer. Like some people to this day, it bewilders me how they macro their officer buffs on a looping macro, and
Absolutely.
just want to smack them on the forehead.
It's painful.
They won't even macro that, but they'll macro pistol drill master, and just as an aside tangent, right
Yeah,
not do that.
just press your buttons. Don't be lazy. All right, so last thing on this page is what's an absolute mandatory is charge. This is your other run. It's not quite as good as scatter in terms of movement defense, but it does give you a nice damage boost. So if you're not worried about any kind of roots, you can use charge indefinitely, but we'll talk more about that later. So at this point in this calculator I have up here, I have 2 points left on the screen. Now you can do a little bit of experimentation with these last points. For me, I like to go on the first page and put 2 points into the cooldown on heal timer reduction, just because I like to have those quick heals whenever I'm playing solo, or it helps a lot in group play too. Less damage your medics have to heal off, but
yeah, not to mention, I mean, it's another button that you get to hit faster to try to proc action for your group if you're absolutely desperate. You know what I mean?
Sure. Like Lo was saying earlier, you could put these 2 points into lethal aim for the sure shot damage. You only get 4%, but that's still better than nothing. You could put the last 2 points into armor if you want more armors. And you sometimes what I like to do is I like to put 1 point into heal cooldown and 1 point into leg strike, because that's a nice ability to have.
Yeah, like I said, if you have points to spend, leg strike can be crazy in 1v1 situations versus certain professions. I think it's a 15-meter snare with a melee weapon, and it's like almost spammable. It's crazy.
So I think that about covers the expertise side. We can go ahead and move on to abilities. We'll start off with Overcharge and Called Shot. We'll just talk about them all at once because they're almost the same. One does more damage, but they're both pretty spammable. So these abilities, as a J officer, they are going to be your main source of action proc. As long as you're hitting these abilities as often as you can, you will pretty much be effective at, proccing those inspirations. And your other two carbine abilities are Paint Target and Sure Shot. Now these are more of your damaging buffs, or I'm sorry, your damaging abilities. I would say you should always try to hit Paint Target first on your target if it's off cooldown, and then go to Sure Shot. Like we talked about earlier, that Paint Target debuff, the several debuffs from it actually will increase damage on all of your specials. So I like to start with Paint Target on my rotation, just maximize the damage output.
I agree 100% there, especially if you invest your points into the advanced Paint Target line. You're getting, I don't know the exact percentage, but it is significant and it can lead to a much larger hit.
We have the melee abilities next, which are Crippling Vortex, Decapitate, and Leg Strike.
It's 10-second root. It's like if you catch somebody without a scatter up or the ability to purge the root itself, it's a game changer. You can basically wipe a team with it, or in a one-on-one situation, make it so they can't get within melee range for that period of time, and it gives you the ability to line of sight, so on and so forth. It's huge.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. It's just another aspect of officer that really makes it a lot of fun, instead of just being a stim bot or a ranged profession where you're just doing the same thing, right? Like having that option to basically play your own little dire BH in a way can really be fun, and you can take care of business by yourself with an SFP following and stuff like that. And like I said, if you have a 5-meter range weapon, melee weapon on Legends, the root is 15 meters from wherever I think you apply it, and that goes around corners, I believe, as well.
And Decapitate, that's a pretty heavy hitting melee ability, but it's on a very long cooldown, but you can definitely finish someone off with it if you're charging in at them. I've seen Decapitate hit for probably like 8 or 9k before in very lucky strike throughs.
Yeah, for sure.
So we have all of those abilities out of the way. We can talk about the AoEs next. This is the cream of the crop for Officer. The first ability, which I think is the most important AoE, is your Artillery Strike. It's something that is 64-meter range, so I would highly recommend to, unless you're saving up your volleys for an SFP, to use Artillery Strike off cooldown, because that's really going to rack up your damage numbers. It's more damage for the medic staff to heal off, etc.
Yeah, it's going to help with that assist, that ranged assist.
Definitely, and it literally has double the range of your next AoEs.
Yeah, and if you're playing on a corner in battlefields and whatnot, like if you're using the Artillery Strike, it will hit people, you know, in certain areas around the corners. If your Artillery Strike is deep enough, you know what I mean? Around the corner from you, not from where it lands, is what I'm trying to say.
We have Core Bomb next. You can drop this ability at your feet. It's not lobbed at anyone, and I believe it's got a 20-meter range on it. I'm not entirely sure on that. But it's something that you have to, you know, kind of be up in people's faces to use.
Yeah, I believe it's a 20 meter range, and I think it's a fire DOT. And when I'm doing my SFP volley, I usually, since you're moving upwards to throw your SFP and your AoEs, I usually try to safely get up close or hug the wall, and Core Bomb is the first thing that I throw, and then I throw the rest, just because I can run away while I'm throwing my grenades and then throwing my Artillery Strike. Just depending on where my position is, I guess. If I'm running late behind my squad, then obviously I'm late to the SFP, so I'll have to throw my other ones first. But
I usually hit it first or last, depending on what my opponent or opponents are doing.
For me, I usually hit Dioxis Grenade last, and there's one reason for that. Dioxis Grenade pulses twice, and it also has, the very first pulse on it has a much shorter fuse than the other AoEs. So if you're hitting SFP after your volley, which you should be doing, you're going to want to make sure that both pulses of that grenade are hitting your enemy to max out the damage of your SFP volley. And lastly, we have Shock Grenade. I don't think there's really much to say about this. The most annoying thing about Shock Grenade is it applies a snare, a really noticeable snare. If you don't have an officer run up, you're going to notice that you're snared by Shock Grenade. It's really annoying.
Yeah, it's almost as bad as like Saber Throw Snare.
Oh god.
Damage build more so than Dioxis Grenade. And I'm not sure where that falls in between Artillery Strike and Core Bomb, but I believe it might be the highest level ability from Officer. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure on that. I assume that these AoE abilities kind of had more or less the same damage base values, but I do believe that some of them hit harder than others. I think you're right. Shock Grenade does hit harder.
Yes, Shock. Yeah, it's a level 86 ability, so Mark 3 you get really late.
With those grenade abilities out of the way, we've already mentioned it a bunch of times already, but Superior Firepower increases the damage of all AoEs by 75%. And this is an ability you're going to want to use in conjunction with any other damage buffs that you have. So this is when you're going to want to pop your Hoth Radio, your Binox, Lair Crystal if you have it, because those are going to even boost your damage even further than your SFP possibly could.
Right, yeah, it all stacks. It all helps out. Every little bit helps. And like Rod was saying, you always want to try to hide it by throwing your AoEs first and then popping SFP, so that by the time all of those AoEs actually hit, the SFP is applied to your character and doing more damage. That way you can hide it from possibly getting stasis. If you're running at somebody and you throw SFP and then you're going to throw your AoEs, it's a lot easier for a medic to be like, oh, I'm just going to take this guy out of the fight and ignore his first volley and just stasis you.
Adding on to that as well, your final ability from your faction rank, General's Airstrike, that also is affected by superior firepower, so that can lead to a significant increase on that.
Oh, absolutely. That can,
Yeah, good point. I forgot about that one.
yeah, that can lead to a very, very deadly SFP. It's going to be very hard to heal off all of those if they land with all of those damage debuffs as well.
And with SFP, I mean, you usually want to try to throw it at least on a dire target.
Sure.
Dire snared. Usually a BH in battlefields will try to dire root an entire group or many of them, and that's where you really want to capitalize on SFP.
Another thing to add on to that too, because all of the AoEs have a radius effect, you want to try and target a person that is in the center of the enemy team.
Absolutely.
Maximize where the abilities land and guarantee that it hits as many players as possible. As an aside too, when you have SFP active or your AoEs in general, if you throw your abilities onto a target that's stasis or otherwise you cannot damage them, they will still land and they will still go off in people that are in the radius of the abilities.
Yep, that's very nice. Like you were saying earlier, you do want to target the center of the group for the splash radius. I talked a lot about this in Commando video, but and this may take some practice, and it is gonna oftentimes require you to break away from your assist colors targets, but it's gonna be worth it in the end because that's more pressure you're putting on the enemy medics.
And one thing I do, SWG, it allows you to bind your pick target to a specific key. I believe it defaults to middle mouse, but if you're able to put your cursor to mouse over and then you select the target manually, that's a very nice way to select someone to drop your AoEs on. I always do that when
I do too. I usually use Z to select target, but it works the same way. So yeah, definitely choose your targets for your AoE rounds in SFP.
You don't want to be tabbing for it. That can
it's gonna take forever, man.
Yeah, and keep in mind just to piggyback his stasis target thing, you can always target that medic in stasis. If they're in stasis, they're probably already screwed, but you can hover over their stasis buff and keep an eye on when it gets down to like 3 or 4 seconds, and then that's when you can throw your AoEs and throw SFP. That way, right when they get out of stasis, whether they're dired or not, or whether they will be or not, they'll get hit by that right when they're coming out of stasis, which can be nice.
And that's the same way if you're in stasis too. You can hover that mouse over that box, and if you're about 2-3 seconds almost out of that box, then you can start hitting off those AoEs to get your next volley off.
It happens a lot. Somebody will stasis you as soon as your first volley ends, and then you can guarantee a second volley in SFP.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Huge
mistake that medics tend to make, especially new medics, is getting you between rounds, and it's very nice when it happens to you. But another thing I would like to note is when you are in stasis, don't stop attacking. You need to keep using those pistol abilities, carbine abilities, because you stop using them when you're in stasis just because you're in stasis. Your team's going to suffer action. So keep spamming them on any target, doesn't matter who, and keep those inspiration procs coming.
Yeah, I think proccing action is huge, even when you're in stasis. If you're stasis, it could possibly mean that your team is running up without you. So just to kind of go with what you're saying, Road, I think it's important to try to learn how to proc action away from fights. So if you cannot use the abilities that he was just talking about, attacking targets using specials while you're in stasis, at least try to hit your advanced tactics, focus fire, drill master, inspiration. You could heal, you could do anything you can to hit you could use your purge, your environmental purge and whatnot. Just keep trying to proc action away without being in the fight. That goes for all situations.
I would say only use the purge and synaptic to proc action if you're like desperately in need. So if your group's fine on action, just save it. But if you're all out of action, yes, definitely that's a good use for those abilities as well.
Purge and synaptic are both very low action cost abilities, so along with the Prode said there, they're good to use if your group needs action and you're pretty much out of action. It can make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
And then the last thing I just want to talk about with SFP and when you're stasis, Hiding your SFP, like we've been talking about, is important for if you do get stasis. Hopefully you can at least get that first round down. If the medic is good enough to get your first round, even with you hiding it. If they're a Doom medic, you'll still be able to get that. If it was a Doom medic stasis, you'll still be able to get that second round off. But if you get your first round off successfully and then you get stasis, and it was a FR stasis, your stasis is going to be extremely short, and you'll be able to get easily both rounds off, if not almost your third, even though the SFP will not last that long. But if it's a Doom medic stasis and they're decent about it, they're usually guaranteed to get at least one of. If they miss your first one and they get your second one, you might not get that second round of SFP. You'd have to time it perfectly.
So I think we have SFP covered fine. We already talked about environment purge and synaptic simulation, what they do, so I'm not going to reiterate them. But we do have tactics, focus fire, and drill master to talk about. Beetyr, can you give us a rundown on what each of those buffs do?
All right, so focus fire is extra strike through and extra crit chance, and tactics is extra con, 70 con, and 5% dodge.
And it has, I believe, CHR as well, crit hit protect at 10%, but I don't know if that calculates in the value of CHR, like a 3-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, it does help with CHR. I'm reading it now. Yep, I didn't know that.
On focus fire too, one thing that's misleading on it, it says that it gives 32% strike through value, but as far as I'm aware, that's incorrect. It's actually half that, 16%.
And drill master?
The damage is increased by 5% overall. If you're using a pistol, then it's an extra 5% damage. And then it has, I think, a little bit of action cost reduction for all group members involved. So if you're doing PvE, then why not use a pistol for the extra damage, right? But if you're not doing PvE, then use a carbine for the added range for both helping with damage and maximizing your survivability. But that's just PvE.
And that's a nice caveat to keep pistol viable in the profession. I really like that they didn't add that damage to carbine as well. So I think we can talk about rally points next. Unfortunately, these are abilities that a lot of officers tend to sleep on and not use very often. I like to throw them as often as I can where necessary. Personally, my favorite is the blue rally point, which gives a straight 5% damage reduction. The red rally point's nice too. Gives you strike through. I don't know the exact value. You can shed some light on that, Beetyr.
Action cost reduction 10% and strike through 5%.
So the reason I like the defensive rally point more is because that's pretty much nerfing your enemy's damage by 5%, all of them. Strike through, yeah, it's nice, but I think overall the defensive rally point is the stronger of the two.
By far, and they apply to all people in your group. It's a great ability to put down when on cooldown, or if you know your team's taking damage.
I think I would agree with you. It's always nice to just eliminate 5% damage to everybody within that rally point. But I mean, hopefully if you're in a battlefield with multiple officers, you guys are on the same page and you're decent enough to just throw both at the same time in the same location. Absolutely. So you can get both at the same time, both applied. But I do have to say the red rally point, don't sleep on that action cost reduction, especially if you're with like a really good Doom medic.
Sure.
You might struggle to proc action for that Doom medic, and it's the worst feeling in the world for a really good Doom medic to be asking you for action.
As a solo officer too, that can help out if you are lacking on action yourself. It does happen.
I think we can move on to your run abilities. So we'll start off with scatter. Can you give us the exact stats on that, Beetyr?
Yeah, so it increases your glancing glow by 5%, which a lot of people forget. Also in PvE, they forget it, and it pisses me off. Scatter's the best move in the world. It eliminates snares and roots, and it increases glancing blow by 5%.
In most situations in group PvP, if you have 8 people in your group, you want to have 2 officers, and part of the reason for that is to ensure you can have scatter up as much as possible. It's one of the best abilities in the game, given that it prevents any kind of snare or root ability other than dire for its duration active.
And that's pretty vital because CC is very powerful in this game, and it's very easy to get caught in CC. So as long as you have scatter up, you can be pretty safe outside of dyers, like you were saying. Now, charge is a little different. You can use charge, and it'll protect you from normal snares, but if you get hit with a smuggler's nerf herder or false hope or what have you, your group is going to be rooted. That charge will not save you. So that's why we're saying, if possible, rotate your runs with the other officer, and keep in mind that you should be rotating scatter as much as possible. You will have a little bit of downtime. Sometimes it's 5 seconds, sometimes it's 10 seconds in between runs, but you can use a charge in between those downtime.
And adding on to that too, crippling vortex can root on a charge. So
absolutely,
yeah. Even double saber throw on a light side Jedi can do it. It's painful, but it does happen.
Pistol whip.
Yeah, it increases. I just want to make sure charge increases damage output by the group by 10% and decreases action cost by 10%. So it's really nice, but again, just with the risk of possibly being rooted is why we're promoting scatter a lot more.
And if you know you're not going to be rooted, if you know you're up against people who do not have the root abilities like crippling vortex, or if they have no smuggler, then you can change charge for that extra damage. There's nothing wrong with that.
Arguably better in those situations. Just
absolutely.
Damage output you give to the entire group and the action cost reduction.
I think that about covers the runs. There's just a few more things to talk about. Inspiration. With the GA set, you'll be able to proc this quite regularly, but you also have the standalone inspiration. It's nice to save this for when you are having action dry spells, or if you've got a medic raging at you saying that you need action, just hit it on instinct.
Yeah, it's huge. Don't just spam it. Don't use it off cooldowns.
Don't macro it.
People with low green bars, or somebody important calls for it.
Lastly, we have emergency shields. Now this officer didn't always have this ability. We used to not have an oh shit button, but this is definitely a nice ability to have. Not only it's like a stand fast in that it reduces your incoming damage by 75%, but it also reduces your outgoing damage by 75%. So that was specifically designed to avoid people using it with their SFP. But what you can do is you can cleanly use it between your 2 volleys. So if you hit it right after your first volley lands, it'll last throughout the duration of your cooldown, and it'll be gone by the time your second volley arrives.
Yeah, it can be a lifesaver. If you get dire snared, it's a good time to use it. Dire rooted. If you're taking damage and you think you can survive with it, depending on where your health bar is at, it's fantastic. It was a huge addition to it. It kind of, especially in 1v1, it can be very overpowered. But yeah, it's always worth getting in any expertise setting you use.
A couple other points that I wanted to address is, like we talked about earlier, Officer is a prime target to get Stasis. So if you're up against really good medics that know when to use Stasis and are really good at boxing you, you can throw your AoEs and you can hit SFP behind a wall. So that's gonna make it so that the medic has to chase you down to get you in a box and put themselves in a vulnerable position. It's a lot easier to get a clean first volley off, but getting the second round is naturally it's going to be a little riskier because they already know you have SFP up. Another thing that I wanted to mention was, like we talked about at the beginning of the video, you should be primarily defensive focused as an officer with your attributes. So, and this is because an officer that is full offense and is just heroing in and dying once the officer dies, the whole group loses the buffs that the officer had. So those are your officer buffs, your inspiration proc, and whatever run you had active. So if you die, you, you lose scatter. Your whole group loses scatter. That's gonna potentially be the end of your group, depending on the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you die and it was your run, you need to say something so that the other officer knows to hit something, hit their charge or hit their scatter, whatever's needed. It also means if you're a solo officer and you die, you need to tell your group, and then when you do get revived, you need to repop your group buffs and everything.
Yep. And that goes into the communication side of things, which is the last thing I want to talk about. You need to be vocal as an officer, maybe more so than other classes. You must, this is an absolute must. When you are coordinating with another officer, you have to be calling your scatters or charges, whatever you're using. So you don't override your runs.
It's a very good habit to get into to decide who's doing what in what order. So you can say, Beetyr, do first scatter before you go into a fight, and then he'll do that. And once his scatter comes to an end, I'll pop mine, and then that rotation continues throughout, unless somebody dies or calls it differently.
Yeah, and in that situation too, I'll just add to it. If I have first scatter, Low picks up the second scatter. Since I have the third scatter, when his scatter drops off, I'll say something like, "Oh, I'm just gonna pop charge for a couple seconds, and then I'll pop my scatter when it's up."
Sure.
Because there's like a 5-second window, I guess, there or something like that.
Yeah, and calling SFP is an important thing to communicate as well, because what hits hard in one SFP, two, and it also lets your group know to try and lay on those dyers, lay on damage, so on and so forth.
Right, and with SFP, it's just such an important move in group play that you might, like, I like to give warnings when it's halfway or when it's 20 seconds away, 10 seconds away, stuff like that.
Same with scatter. You want to let people know, like, hey, here's what these group abilities are looking like, so they can play around that.
For sure.
A good thing to do is, like, if neither of the officers have scatter up, play more defensively.
Absolutely. And you also want to communicate to your group whenever you're about to SFP, because if you hit SFP and your group hears that ability, they're going to be possibly scared shitless because they don't know who it's from because you didn't communicate it. And they're going to be
right.
Go ahead.
Right, yeah, especially for your medics, especially coming from a medic player, like, whenever I hear an SFP go off, I'm automatically hitting my keybinds to check the other officers. So if my officer is hitting their SFP and they're not telling me, they're just wasting my time.
Absolutely. Always be vocal. Get it. If you don't have a mic, get a mic. If you want to be in competitive battlefields, you must be vocal. Play smart. Try not to die. Keep those runs up, and you may just one day find yourself a successful officer.
Or a fuel-injected suicide machine, as they say it. You and Skeptor.
Yeah. It's a fun class. There's a lot you can play around with to make different builds that are all viable. And I kind of like that aspect of it.
Hug walls as much as you can. That's your best defense. LOS and hugging walls is your best
Pray
defense.
for RNG. All right, I think that about covers the profession. I appreciate all your input, guys, and thanks for coming along.
Thanks, Max.
Cheers.